Hello, my name is Joy Cheney, and I'm Executive Director of the National Urban League's Washington Bureau. And I want to welcome you to our next session, Education, the Heart of American Families and the American Economy, presented by our sponsor, T-Mobile. Over the next hour, we will be joined by education experts, congressional leaders, and officials in the Biden administration for an in-depth look at inequality and the legacy of structural racism in the nation's education system. More to the point, we're going to talk about solutions and the extraordinary opportunity before us to bring about lasting change. Nationally and in your community, the Urban League is leading this change, and you'll also learn more about our education and equity programs and their empowering impact on African American youth. But first, a special message from our sponsor, T-Mobile.
Thank you, my dear friend, Joy Cheney, and good afternoon. My name is Clint Odom, Vice President of Strategic Relations and External Affairs at T-Mobile. On behalf of T-Mobile, we're proud to sponsor today's session called Education, the Heart of American Families and the Economy. I'm even more proud to be an urban leaguer. For decades, the National Urban League has been a trailblazer on research and advocacy around children and education to make sure that children of color have the opportunity to succeed and be prepared for the career they're choosing. Even before the pandemic struck, T-Mobile understood the importance of connecting children to the classroom and that broadband would be that essential connection. At T-Mobile, we're invested in closing the homework gap by committing $10 billion over 3 years to ensure that 10 million school-age children, grades K through 12, are connected to the internet for free. This is called Project 10 Million. And you'll be hearing about it more over the course of the next few weeks. In partnership with the Marshall Fund, we are also rolling out our Magenta Scholars Program to make sure that college debt will not stand in the way of our children achieving generational wealth. So I look forward to continuing the strong partnership between T-Mobile and the National Urban League. I can't wait to see today's session. Joy, back to you.
Thank you, T-Mobile. And now it's my distinct pleasure to welcome the President and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark H. Morial.
And thank you, Joy. And thanks to all of you for your commitment and passion for our children, for their education, and especially at this crucial time in our nation's history. As you are aware, education has been one of the great challenges of the past year under COVID. The pandemic pushed teachers and parents and children to their absolute limits as they struggled with remote learning, isolation, and access to technology. For Black children and other children of color, COVID inflamed long simmering inequities, systems failures, including dwindling resources, biased learning standards, devalued teachers, and crumbling infrastructure. We've red flagged those issues year after year after year. And despite great effort by many, we have not addressed them directly enough. And that led to a perfect storm once the pandemic struck, a catastrophe that we have got to help our children recover from. Now, if there's a silver lining to the pandemic, it is this. The cold light of clarity has been placed on the problems we face, and that's galvanized support for what I call equitable reform. I think our nation is ready to tackle this challenge. Leading the way is a new administration in the White House that has already made promising investments in the future of our schools. Next up, we have one of the leading champions of education and workforce development in Washington, D.C. United States Representative Bobby Scott is the first African-American to represent the Commonwealth of Virginia in the Congress since Reconstruction. He's now the chair of the Committee on Education and Labor. where he works to improve equity in education and free students from crippling debt. He's also been a leader in co-authoring the Every Student Succeeds Act, which reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act for the first time in 13 years. Ladies and gentlemen, urban leaguers, let's welcome a great friend, Representative Bobby Scott.
Hi, I'm Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia's 3rd District, and I chair the House Committee on Education and Labor. I first want to thank President Morial and the Urban League for all that you do to advance educational equity, and I'm honored to share this virtual stage with so many distinguished educational leaders. Just last month, we commemorated the anniversary of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in the case of Brown v. Board of Education. In its decision, the court declared that in these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Then the court ruled segregation in public schools unconstitutional by declaring that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Regrettably, 67 years later, the promise of Brown remains unfulfilled. According to the Government Accountability Office, our schools are more segregated by race and class today than at any time since the 1960s. This segregation does not just isolate low-income students and students of color, it isolates their opportunities and resources. Even before the pandemic, schools predominantly serving students of color faced a $23 billion racial funding gap compared to schools predominantly serving white students. The COVID-19 pandemic has made things worse by exacerbating inequality by creating learning loss even beyond the traditional summer slide. The result has been a measurable widening of our nation's persistent achievement gap. Because public schools are primarily funded by local real estate taxes, the federal role in education has been to supplement support for low-income children to reduce inequities in education, primarily through Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. This is why I recently helped pass the American Rescue Plan Act, which provided the most significant one-time federal investment in K-12 education in our nation's history. Importantly, this funding is strategically targeted towards Title I schools to ensure that resources go where they are most needed. Most schools are using the relief not only to reopen their schools safely, but also to take steps to address lost learning time. This includes funding comprehensive after-school and summer programs, extending school days, and hiring counselors and nurses to support students' academic performance and social-emotional well-being. For decades, educational leaders, including the National Urban League, have called on Congress to address the disparities throughout our educational system. Earlier this year, in fact, President Morial testified at an Education and Labor Committee hearing to help us chart a path towards educational equity in the wake of COVID-19. By passing the American Rescue Plan Act, we have taken a critical step towards answering that call. Yet, as the conference theme recognizes, we must go beyond simply restoring the pre-pandemic status quo, even as schools continue to reopen. We still have far more work ahead to finally achieve the promise of Brown for students of color. To that end, I remain committed to passing legislative solutions that will help us achieve an equitable normal. Thank you again for your continued leadership. And as we recover from the pandemic, I look forward to continuing our efforts to expand educational equity and ensure that all students can reach their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. We've heard the Washington perspective, but there's now the perspective from the community, from the neighborhoods, on the ground, from our teachers who are in the classroom doing the work, fighting the battles for children in the classroom and for their own rights and safety at the negotiating table. I'm so proud to introduce and welcome to the National Urban League's 18th Legislative Policy Conference, the president of the National Education Association, educator, labor leader, and civil rights champion, Becky Pringle.
First, let me thank National Urban League President Mark Morial for convening this very important discussion. I want to thank you, Mark, and Washington Bureau Executive Director Joy Cheney for your visionary leadership and for partnering with the NEA to make things better for our students. And I am always glad to be in any space that includes Congressman Bobby Scott, someone who has dedicated his life to supporting public education. I don't think any of you were surprised to witness educators taking on the unique and daunting challenges of this past year with creativity and commitment, resilience and resolve. Even through their mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, they have been standing in the gaps for their students. So many of whom, even before COVID hit, couldn't get enough to eat, couldn't do homework because they had no connectivity at home. And far too many who didn't even have a place to call home. We all know which students shoulder those inequities the most: our Black and Brown and Indigenous students. We also know the inequities they experience are sewn up into every one of this nation's social systems, not just our education system, but our healthcare and economic and housing systems. All of the inequities within those systems compound on our students. The pandemic only served to exacerbate them. And as always, society's ills found their way to our schoolhouse doors. As we continue the work of safely and equitably reopening our nation's schools to in-person learning, we must double down on the work to ensure that every student, every Black, white, brown, Asian, and Indigenous student, every student who lives in an underserved neighborhood, every LGBTQ plus student, and every student who is differently abled, everyone sees equity and justice in their schools and their neighborhoods, in their lives. That is why educators work so hard to help pass President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which allocated over $170 billion to education. It's why I directed the resources of the 3 million member National Education Association to position our educators and the unions that represent them to be partners in the decisions about what is best for our students, how to best allocate these funds, how they can be active participants in making those decisions about how the ARP money is spent, so that we not only ensure the safety and health of our students, but we actually take advantage of this opportunity to transform teaching and learning and to develop an authentic and comprehensive system of assessment that informs our goal of meeting the academic, social, and emotional needs of all of our students. I have been saying this to our NEA members from the start of this year. And now I want to say it to you. We must unite the entire nation to reclaim public education as a common good, and then transform it into something it was never actually designed to be: a racially and socially just and equitable system that prepares every student, everyone, to succeed in a diverse and independent world. Most especially in this moment, as the adults in these systems, we must step up. We must do better by our students. We must. I have no doubt that you will continue doing everything you can to be worthy of our students. Thank you all for your visionary leadership, and I look forward to this important conversation.
That is fantastic. I want to thank all of our special guests. Congressman Scott and Becky Pringle, you've been terrific, enlightening, and inspirational. And you've really made this an outstanding program so far, but we are not done. Stay tuned, because I'm going to turn the program back over to Joy Cheney.
Thank you, Mark. As I mentioned at the top of the program, the National Urban League plays an important leadership role in youth development and promoting equity and opportunity in education. Here to talk more about the National Urban League Equity and Excellence Project is the Senior Vice President of Education, Youth Development, and Health at the Urban League, Hal Smith.
Thank you, Joy. Launched in 2010, the National Urban League's Equity and Excellence Project is built on the belief that students, parents, and community leaders share an investment in education reform and innovation. We engage in reform efforts by leveraging our greatest asset, the Urban League movement, and the president and CEOs who lead it. In practice, that vision works to expand and deepen opportunities for families, students, and community stakeholders in order to better ensure the provision of all necessary resources, disrupt inequity, and accelerate progress towards delivering more fully on the promise of public education. To extend learning and deepen understanding, the Urban League movement holds local, statewide, and national convenings for community leaders and other stakeholders that provide platforms where promising practices, critical data, and impactful research are disseminated and policies are clarified through a civil rights-based and community-focused lens. Today, we have another of those convenings intended to move the nation forward by providing each student with an equitable and excellent education. Our final piece of the program is a roundtable on the future of education and the goals of equity, quality, and empowerment. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our esteemed panel. First, we have the Honorable Miguel Cardona, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Next, we have Janet Murguia, President and CEO of Unidos US. Welcome. And finally, we have Esther L. Bush, President and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Pittsburgh. Welcome to you as well.
Well, thank you, Hal, for that introduction. My name is Esther Bush, and I am extremely pleased to be here today to talk about such a critically important topic for all of us here in the United States. And Secretary Cardona, it is such a pleasure to have a conversation with you. You know the high hopes this country has for your leadership, and we want to share part of that today with this chat. And so let's just jump right in. My first question for you is, what are you seeing as the priorities for this country when we look at education post-pandemic? What are the things you are looking at as our priorities?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Honored to be here, and appreciate being with you, Esther, and sharing the time with a colleague, Janet Murguia, who I know is a champion for children across the country. I'm looking forward to the work ahead. Yes, it's a challenging time in our country's history, but it's a tremendous opportunity. So to answer your question, I really want to make sure that when we're thinking about post-pandemic, the bar is higher than it ever was before. We know that prior to the pandemic, there were access gaps for students across the country based on race and place, where they live, zip code, and unfortunately, almost you could predict based on race access. So we need to do better. We need to, as the president says, build back better. The American Rescue Plan provides funds for that, but it's going to take strong leadership to match the funds to make sure that we're unapologetically addressing what Dr. Nogueira calls the normalization of failure, where we've seen generations of gaps in access and outcomes in our students across the country. Secondly, I want to make sure that college is accessible and affordable to to all students, that you shouldn't have to be thinking about paying your loans for the rest of your life if you're going to access higher education. And then I also want to make sure that we have better pathways. I think we need to start earlier to evolve our middle and high schools to make sure that we're providing students with pathways to the workforce, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges. You know, with the American Families Plan, the goal is to have community college accessible to all. Think about the opportunity for those students who maybe are not even thinking about college because they fear the costs. I also want to make sure that our agency is working hard to work across lines and make sure I'm working with Department of Housing, Department of Labor, Department of Transportation, to make sure that we're working together because we serve the same families. So interagency work is important. And then, you know, lastly, but I can keep going, but lastly, I want to make sure we remove the silos across the country. We have great practices happening in schools across the country. We need to do a better job lifting up those best practices so we can learn from one another. We're going to heal, learn, and grow together. And that takes strong leadership and strong resources, which the president has already committed to.
Thank you so much for that response. And actually, I could ask you a list of questions based on the topics that you hit on. But I want to now go to Janet and ask her questions. When you look at issues of social justice, gender issues, racial violence, cultural differences, and even partisan politics, everything is wrapped up, just like the secretary just stated, in education. What can an organization like yours that does focus on civil rights issues and social justice issues, what can you do to assist locally, statewide, and nationally, and absolutely supportive of everything that the secretary just said? You have all the answers.
Thank you. It's such an honor, really and truly, for me to be here today with not only the Honorable Secretary Miguel Cardona, a wonderful leader and someone who has not just credentials, but has real world experience engaging students of color, parents, teachers, administrators, and now someone who can bring all of that expertise and that perspective to the head and to the very top leadership of our Department of Education. It's wonderful. And of course, the legendary Esther Bush. Esther, I can't thank you enough for the leadership that you've shown, not just in Pittsburgh, but that has echoed across the country. We truly value your voice and will continue to follow you as you move forward. Look, what Secretary Cardona outlined is spot on. One of the things that we have to recognize is that these issues are real, they're stubborn, but what you asked me the question, Esther, what can I do? One of the things that I can do and that we at Unidos, the largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the country, can do is what I'm doing today. I am partnering with the National Urban League, with Mark Morial, with Esther Bush, and with chapters across the country to make sure that we can leverage our collective voice and advocacy on behalf of our students of color who are going to need it as we emerge from this pandemic, which really revealed the underlying challenges that have long faced our communities because of systemic inequities. And let's face it, because of systemic racism that is rooted in a lot of our systems, including education. So what Secretary Cardona has outlined is really important, and truly the Biden administration's proposal in the American Rescue Plan really will help go a long way to address resources that are targeted to the most needy. Students of color, Esther, you know this, Secretary Cardona knows this, but Black, Brown, Asian Pacific American students now make up 50% of our students who are in K through 12. If we're not making sure that those resources are targeted to those most in need and who have felt the brunt of those systemic inequalities, we're not going to be able to make sure that those very same students who are going to be future taxpayers, future entrepreneurs, and the backbone of our economy are going to be able to fully contribute. So those types of resources targeted to those students who need them most, with the leadership of folks who know our community is so important right now. And our partnership, the Black community and the Latino community coming together to bring our collective voice of advocacy on behalf of these students has never been more important.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I tell you, the two of you are just fantastic advocates for the so importantly critical work that is necessary here in the United States to move our education for our children forward. And when I say our children, I am talking about all of our futures. Secretary Cardona, you said something that really is very frightening to me. And it is something very real. I have used it myself before. But tell me how you're going to help us get over the normalization of failure. That is such a powerful statement. What are we going to do to help the United States get over that despite everything that Janet just shared?
You know, it's jarring. We should never become complacent. I'm coming to this as a father who got into education because he wanted his children to have more opportunities. And he didn't want his children, my daughter's 15, my son is 16. I didn't want them to be in a system where people have expectations based on skin color, race, or zip code. And when I say the normalization of it, you know, Dr. Noguera talks about that, but for me, it's like we have an opportunity, Esther, to challenge that normalization now more than ever before. I've been in education about 23, 24 years. Like, we need to be bold. And that's why I say, yes, it's great to see 130 billion, but we have to make sure we get a good return on investment. We have to make sure that when our kids come back, that we're, you know, fair isn't always equal, right? Some kids were hit harder. I don't have to tell you, Black and brown communities face mortality at a greater rate due to COVID than other communities. I don't have to tell you that urban centers, that densely populated communities saw negative impacts of COVID at a higher rate. So we need to make sure we're proportionate with our resources and support in those same communities. I'm not just talking about the ventilation systems, which matter, because in urban centers, we have very old schools. I'm talking about access to mental health supports, access to wraparound services, access to great meals, access to great curriculum, access to smaller class sizes. This has to be the new norm if we're serious about addressing the needs of our learners who were impacted the most by the pandemic. And these are the same populations of students who have been, another term that has been used by Dr. Noguera is like a benign neglect, right? It's not in your face, but we know that they have less access. We know that there's less funding in those communities. So now it's time to double down, make sure we lead with urgency, and make sure that we're putting in policies and practices now that address those gaps in access that persisted in education long before the pandemic.
And you are so totally correct. This is the thing. Education for children of color has been an issue long before the pandemic. We know that it's been unequal. It is frightening to see the difference in the haves and the have-nots by zip codes, by skin color, etc. Janet, what can you share with us based on everything that we know historically and more specifically since the pandemic that all parents can do to assist us to get to equality in education?
Well, it's a great question, Esther. And I think there's never been a more important time for our parents and community leaders to really be engaged, to lend their voice, and to hold local school leaders accountable, whether that's the school board, whether that's principals, administrators. I know that Secretary Cardona has asked me to hold him accountable. Everybody needs to make this commitment to make sure that we do not lose this generation of students. I've heard people say it's a lost generation. It cannot be a lost generation. these students, primarily students of color who were disproportionately affected by this incredible crisis of the pandemic, have felt that brunt, not only in the classrooms, whether it's been the lack of access to broadband, and we saw some painful pictures and stories. I saw, one of those photos that really spoke for a million words of two little Latina young girls trying to do their homework outside of a Taco Bell because that's where they could get some sort of connection to internet. Secretary Cardona has talked about the importance, and the Biden administration has put resources in for expanding broadband and making sure that local officials are also meeting those standards and access for students. So as parents and as leaders, our voice has never been more important. And I would just tell you, things that could help immediately is this commitment that the Biden administration has made. Secretary Cardona has said he wants to diversify our teacher workforce. Our students need to see role models who look like them in their classrooms. We also need to pass the Counseling, Not Criminalization in Schools Act, which we, and National Urban League and Wheels US has endorsed. That bill would substitute funding of school-based law enforcement officers with counselors, social workers, and others to address what Secretary Cardona acknowledged have been the mental health challenges that our students of color are facing. And finally, our students need to not only see themselves in the teacher workforce, but they need to see themselves in the educational materials, in the curriculums that are being presented. We need to teach the history of our communities and have our children learn about the voices and accomplishments that have not traditionally been included. And we need to make sure all of those elements are part of the change. Our parents out in communities can make sure that those local school officials and leaders are held accountable to do just that right now. It's never been more important.
You gave a list of things that each one we could spend a whole day discussing and still not be finished. And that's why it's so critically important for parents to understand that they have a consistent role. But when we talk about, and Secretary, oh, my mind is just jumping because even you listed so many things we need to be doing at the same time. It's not just education. It's not just your zip code. It is your housing. It is, do you have access to broadband? It feels like, especially with the pandemic, there are just so many basic things that are missing for too many American children. And I have to underscore, especially the Black and brown. So, Secretary, please give us some more answers about what you're going to do to help us fix this and what we can do to help you fix it.
Thank you. So, I was glad to hear Janet mention diversifying the profession. In the Families Plan, there's $2.8 billion dedicated to develop programs, grow your own programs. We have Black and brown paraeducators, climate specialists in our buildings. Let's give them a pathway to become teachers. They want to be there. Let's give them a pathway to become teachers in their community, because it's great for all students to see teachers that reflect the beautiful diversity of this country. What I really want is to create a culture of partnership that you're doing now across our country. And I'm a big believer in equal amounts of support and accountability, right? So the support has come out. The president led with support. There's the American Rescue Plan. The jobs plan is $100 billion for school infrastructure, because, when I visited Philadelphia and I saw that those buildings are 130, 140 years old and their ventilation systems are so far behind that those kids are not able to return to school as quickly because they had to tend to those issues, that we're going to address that, right? So the support is there, the money, the financial support. I want there to be a commensurate amount of political will and leadership to address those issues that are going to get to the root causes of some of these problems. And then I would like there to be a sense of supportive accountability to make sure that we don't lose this moment to utilize the funds to address those needs. I want there to be transparency in where the money is going, ensuring that it's going towards those students that need it most, ensuring that we have the digital divide in our rearview mirror very soon. It is a finite problem that we can address. The resources are there now. Let's make sure that we don't lose the sense of urgency, Esther. I think that's honestly the not only the engagement. I'd love to see parents being at board meetings, asking the questions about how their children are going to be served, having an understanding of how those school systems need them to advocate for those things that they value, but also ensuring that the return on investment is there, making sure that we don't lose our sense of urgency that we have today. You know, the lights are going to be on in the fall. Things are going to look a little bit more normal. Let's not forget the damage that was done to many of our communities. So I guess what I would want the most is a sustained level of urgency around addressing the gaps that exist. Because once we start relaxing, we're going to go back to how it was. And we can do better. As a country, we can do better.
We can absolutely do better. And I would like for each of you to respond to this question. And both of you have mentioned it in your response to questions earlier. And that is the lack of teachers of color in the United States. And teachers of color not only has been proven, it assists students of color to increase their academic learning, but it increases all students. And that's what we have to be focused on. How can we get more African-American men? How can we get more brown and Black teachers in every grade level? What can we do to assist teachers to become certified? What can we do to assist college graduates or individuals going to college to want to be teachers? I wanted to be a teacher when I graduated from high school and when I graduated from college. It was a proud profession. Approach it from any angle that you want. I gave you a lot to work with there. What do you think, Janet?
Well, I'll just make one point. I know the secretary, this is a high priority as well, but I just would say, look, Esther, you're right. There's never been a more important time for us to see that diversified workforce in our teaching community. And coming out of this pandemic, we've seen a lot of challenges for teachers. So one, we have to make sure we're recruiting and retaining the brightest and the best, and that they're being placed in the schools and with students that most need them. There's been a disconnect with that in the past. But I would say that, look, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to recruiting young people in this area. The pandemic has shown that we must place a higher value on our educators. And they're not just teaching anymore, Esther. They're being the counselors. They're being the support for these students in more than just the classroom educational curriculums. And so they ought to be compensated appropriately. That really should be reflected in the overall value that we as a society culturally place on students, place on teachers and the student-teacher relationship. I'll just cite one statistic. An Economic Policy Institute analysis finds that teachers earn 21% less on average than other college-educated workers. And that's just one study. I've seen others that show a bigger gap. Without doubt, teachers should earn sustainable salaries. And really, as a country, we need to make sure that those salaries reflect the value of what those teachers mean. And that is a very, very deep relationship that they have with our students. And now coming out of the pandemic, it's more than just the curriculum. They're providing real leadership and support to these families.
Right. Secretary Cardona, same question.
Thank you. You know, we want more Black and brown educators across the country because we do know that everyone benefits from that. We have to make sure, first and foremost, that the experience of our students in our schools, the experience of our Black and brown students are good experiences. We have to make sure that our Black and brown students and families look at schools as positive, welcoming places where they feel welcome, where they see themselves in the curriculum, where they feel empowered. We need to make sure we have schools that are not having exclusionary practices where you can see Black and brown students are being excluded more, suspended more, kicked out more. I wouldn't want to go be a teacher in a community where I don't feel like I'm welcome. So let's make our K-12 system the best we can, where we make them places where our Black and brown students want to be there and want to come back to them, right? For so many of our students who are thinking about going to college, they're not thinking about going back to school because maybe the system didn't work well for them. So that's number one. Let's make sure that we're creating welcoming environments for all students where they feel accepted, they can see themselves in the curriculum, they feel embraced. Then let's make sure we have better pathways. Middle and high school, we should have career pathways that include the education profession so that our students in our classrooms see themselves as potential teachers. It was a teacher that tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You might be a great teacher." So that's what brought me in. But what if we had pathways? It could be an after-school club. It could be a course that you can take as an elective to give students an opportunity to become a teacher. And as Janet mentioned, I appreciate her mentioning this, let's pay them more, especially in those areas where they're doing everything. You know, in 30 states in our country, 30 states, a mid-career teacher, I'm not talking about a new teacher, a mid-career teacher in a family of 4 qualifies for federal assistance. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable, knowing that our teachers have to go back and get their master's degree. It doesn't take a pandemic for us to realize how important teachers are, but I hope post-pandemic, we can change our behaviors to make sure that we're valuing them and that we're creating the teaching profession as a pathway where students want to be in.
Thank you so much. And final question, 30 seconds. I just want you to share what is your greatest priority out of this whole list of things that we need to do on behalf of our children and on behalf of the economic success of the United States of America? Short answer. Janet?
Well, I'm gonna have to buy a little bit more time, but I'll just tell you this, Esther. Come on, you gotta work with me just a tiny bit, because I just want to say this. Look, there's never been a more important time for our civic engagement, for our voice and our advocacy on behalf of our children. And I love that we're coming together, even here today, the Urban League and Unidos, Black and brown civil rights organizations coming together because we have common aspirations for our students, for our children. I remember Dr. King in the 1960s wrote a letter to Cesar Chavez, who was fasting on behalf of farm workers. And he said, our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for justice and humanity. That struggle continues, but with the leadership that we're seeing emerging, I believe in this administration, including the commitment by Secretary Cardona and President Biden and Vice President Harris to expand multi-tiered approaches to make sure we're funding not only education in the single largest single investment of education in our history, but also housing, access to healthcare, early childhood education, and broadband. We need to lend our voice in support of these legislative initiatives so they become laws and they become a reality. We are in this together, and I'm so proud of the partnership. And I really want to thank Mark Morial for his leadership in understanding that we have to be in this together. And if we are, we're going to find solutions together.
Thank you so very much. And Secretary Cardona, would you please give us your last word for today? Because you know we'll be following up, both of us, in terms of organizations. Thank you so much, please.
It's my pleasure. I want this to be an ongoing dialogue. we have to work together. En la unión está la fuerza, right? We know that we have an opportunity to do more in these next few years coming out of the pandemic than has been done ever before. And we must seize that opportunity. So to answer your question, I want there to be a sustained sense of urgency, that matches the president's commitment in terms of dollars. We need to make sure we're standing up for our students, not only today, but when the pandemic is in our rearview mirror and we still see access gaps, we need to be bold, to work together, to stand up for our students. They're waiting for us. They need us now more than ever. And we're privileged to be in positions to serve. And I look forward to doing it with you. En la unión está la fuerza. Thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to ongoing conversations with you and the entire Urban League to make sure that we're moving this along forward. And thank you, Unidos, as well for partnering with us.
Absolutely. And I want to thank each of you for your commitment and of course for your participation today. Our partnerships will absolutely continue and grow, and we will bring others in. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naja Blonde-White, and I'm the Global Chief Marketing Officer for Vice Media Group. I'm proud to moderate for such an important discussion around Build Back Better, the resurgence of Black businesses. At Vice Media Group, we're proud to team up with the National Urban League on our own program called Black Plus, dedicated to the same initiative. This session is dedicated to the resilience and the power of those entrepreneurs that we serve, those that are most impacted by the pandemic. Some are predicting that nearly half won't return to business. This session is about how we help them and how we make impact. We reject the diagnosis that we face. Consider this hour an informed discussion on policy, on legislation, about solutions, and impact that are sustainable. Black and brown businesses will build back better. We are the backbone of the economy in this country. We need them, we need help, we work together. But before we begin this very important dialogue, here's a message from our sponsor, Eli Lilly. Thank you.
Lilly is a proud partner of the National Urban League, and we salute your leadership in improving the lives for millions of Black Americans. Lilly is making progress toward greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. Last year, we launched the Racial Justice Initiative, which is focused on 5 areas: diversity partners, healthcare access, jobs, people development, and social impact. Since then, we've pledged over $30 million to Black-owned venture capital firms focused on underrepresented founders and entrepreneurs. We've also created new apprenticeship programs aimed at hiring more Black Americans into family-sustaining jobs. We're improving diversity in Lilly's clinical trial programs by including more Black American patients and investigators. And we've pledged $25 million and 25,000 volunteer hours toward racial justice work in our communities. To learn more, visit Lilly.com and search for racial justice. Best wishes to a dynamic legislative policy conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli Lilly. The future of minority-owned enterprises is the essential piece of our nation's economic recovery. The National Urban League is working with the Biden-Harris administration and Congress to prioritize resources, funding, and policy to make sustainable impact. A longtime friend of the National Urban League, please welcome Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in your annual National Urban League Legislative Policy Conference. I would like to recognize President Mark Morial and the Board of Directors for their commitment and dedication to civil and equal rights. I would also like to thank the Urban League for sending experts such as Kyle Williams and Clint Odom to testify and present before the committee that I chair, the Financial Services Committee. The National Urban League is a historic civil rights organization that has been creating opportunities, fighting against discrimination and racism, promoting homeownership, and supporting entrepreneurship for African Americans in this country. At a time when our nation has gone through a reckoning, the National Urban League is playing a key role in building back our communities after the pandemic, which includes helping Black-owned businesses get back on their feet and addressing long-standing inequalities that predate this pandemic. Just recently, we commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, where a violent white mob killed hundreds of Black men, women, and children, destroying thousands of homes and businesses, thus destroying Black wealth. 100 years later, Black-owned businesses continue to face lending discrimination and lack access to the capital that is needed to grow. Congress responded quickly to the pandemic last March by passing the CARES Act. But this bill, while it provided substantial relief, we later learned that the big banks often excluded small and minority-owned businesses from receiving these PPP loans. When the PPP funds ran out, I had to get to work. I worked closely with Representative Nydia Velasquez, and we came up with and ensured that $60 billion was reserved exclusively for our minority banks, our community banks, and our credit unions. Now, our minority banks that's referred to as MDIs, that is our Black banks, and community development institutions known as CDFIs, are the ones that we depend on to lend directly to the communities they serve to ensure that all small businesses received assistance. So it was also clear that our MDIs and CDFIs needed additional government support to truly support low-income communities and communities of color. From the very beginning of the pandemic, I advanced legislation aimed at strengthening the MDIs and CDFIs with equity investments directly from the government. Using these investments, MDIs and CDFIs would be able to provide consumer and business loans into our communities. So I worked closely with Senator Mark Warner and then negotiated a bipartisan deal with Senators Brown and Crapo and my ranking member to ensure a historic investment of another $12 billion in the December 2020 appropriations bill. So today, I continue to work with Senator Warner by convening an advisory panel to guarantee that these funds are quickly and effectively sent to our MDIs and CDFIs to ensure they can fully support our communities in the recovery from the pandemic. I'm sure you share the relief I feel that we have President Biden in office. We finally have a partner in the White House who is prioritizing communities of color. I was proud to work with the president on the American Rescue Plan, that act which provided $1.9 trillion in critical relief, including $27.5 billion in emergency rental assistance, $10 billion to assist struggling homeowners, and $10 billion that is being deployed through Treasury's State Small Business Credit Initiative to provide up to $100 billion in new loans and investments supporting small and minority businesses. Our work on behalf of Black-owned businesses is ongoing. So recently, I called the CEOs of JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs to come before the committee to testify and ensure they are honoring their commitments on investments to our MDIs and CDFIs, their promises of structural change in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, and their commitments on diversity and inclusion within their banks. As a direct result of the hearing, the banks made several announcements. For example, Bank of America has announced that it will raise its minimum wage to $25 an hour by 2025. I will continue to press the big banks to make positive and constructive changes in how they treat customers, particularly consumers of color. I and my committee members are also working with the Biden administration on increasing our nation's affordable housing infrastructure as part of his infrastructure bill, and to provide housing resources such as down payment assistance and universal vouchers to help prospective home buyers and low-income renters, respectively. Many people of color struggle to meet down payment requirements and are also challenged in accessing affordable rental housing. Given President Biden's recent announcements on his administration's commitment to addressing racial equity, I am pleased that we have a partner to work with on this important issue. We can see that providing housing as infrastructure has generated some opposition from the other side of the aisle. So it is important for all of us to make our voices heard about the importance of housing and to elevate the work that the National Urban League does in this critical space. So again, I would like to thank you for your work on behalf of communities of color, particularly Black-owned businesses, and for all of your efforts during this crisis. And thank you again for having me here at your National Legislative Conference.
Congresswoman Waters, thank you for your time. Thank you for your remarks. It's time to get into our discussion in building back our business community, stronger and better than ever. We have an outstanding group of panelists, activists, if you will, with us today. So let's meet them, starting with Ms. Natalie Madeira Cofield, Assistant Administrator, Office of Women's Business Ownership, U.S. Small Business Administration. Welcome, Ms. Cofield. Mr. Ron Busby, President of U.S. Black Chamber. Welcome, Mr. Busby. Ms. Stephanie Devon, Vice President of Entrepreneurship and Business Development, the National Urban League. Welcome, Ms. Devon. And last but not least, Ms. Sheila Mixon, Senior Vice President for Business Development and Entrepreneurship of the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio. Welcome, Ms. Mixon. Thank you all. Let's get started with this discussion. Mr. Busby, pre-pandemic, what was the status of Black entrepreneurship, both in terms of its impact on the economy and its overall health and progress?
Great question, and thank you for having the U.S. Black Chamber join this esteemed panel this morning. We're excited about the dialogue, about the conversation. And as we look to move forward, we also have to make sure that we're looking in the past. And so it is a great question to start with. Early on, prior to the pandemic, the Black business community was thriving. We owned and operated over 2.6 million Black-owned businesses, doing annually over $200 billion in annualized revenue, which really gave us the footprint to be able to move our economic agenda forward. But during 2020, we all felt the trifecta. The trifecta was really three-legged stool, the first one being the virus itself. And we saw so many African Americans lose their lives unnecessarily due to a pandemic. Many of them were called essential workers and were forced to go to work without having the opportunity to work from home or even to be safeguarded. The second leg of that stool was the stimulus package, or the lack thereof for many Black-owned businesses. We know that there was a stimulus package, the largest that this country has seen. $349 billion was announced on a Friday. And by that Saturday afternoon, $250 billion of that had already been awarded to 50 publicly white traded firms without ever asking, were you impacted by the virus? Did you have to let go of employees? Did you lose customers? Did you lose revenue? It was really based upon a relationship with many Black businesses did not have in reference to financial institutions. And then the third leg of that was actually the murder of George Floyd that we all witnessed on TV. Combining those impacts, we saw that the impact for Black businesses, that we lost 41% of our national footprint in reference to Black-owned businesses, equating to over 450,000 Black businesses closed during a period of time where we were growing and expanding. What we have to take into consideration is when those businesses close, many of them won't have the opportunity to reopen. And those revenue, those dollars, those employees, those vendors, customers that they all had in those local communities, many of them will be lost. And so we have to start where we ended. And that is, how do we have an economic agenda moving forward that encompasses all of us? And so we're really excited about this Biden administration as it is addressing the needs and concerns of Black businesses. And I just want to talk a little bit about the payroll protection plan. If we talk about a program that was set up, that was created to ensure that the employee was taken care of, but not the employer, was really unfair to the Black business community. And so we've got to make sure that we're intentional in reference to programs that are being created to address our needs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Busby. Ms. Cofield, would you like to make a comment on some of the programs that the Biden-Harris administration has put in place? Some may argue it's not happening quick enough. Can you give a comment about that and what we should be looking forward to?
Sure. And thank you again for having the U.S. Small Business Administration as a part of today's program. The Office of Women's Business Ownership is the only federal office within the Small Business Administration focused on empowering, giving voice to, and funding women business owners and women business centers across the nation. We have a budget of nearly $70 million for which we have used to support 135 women's business centers across the nation. And many of us also know that the fastest growing entrepreneurial demographic in the country is Black and Brown women. So I'm very proud to have been appointed to this post in March. I will say a few things. One, when it comes to the types of federal programs that have come out of the Biden-Harris administration and the ways in which our administration has looked at a built-in foundation of equity. It starts with looking at what President Biden did on his first day in office, which was sign an equity executive order for which all federal agencies are required and responsible for evaluating their programs, their services, and their offerings that connect with the U.S. Citizens and the American public. And the Small Business Administration is a part of implementing those types of evaluations and that type of review. I happen to chair the equity task force within the Small Business Administration, looking at an entire portfolio of programs that we have, from our 7A and micro loan programs to our international centers, to our women's business centers and SBDC centers across the nation. That's one. I always say that you can tell the priorities of a president by what they do on their first day in office. And the fact that this was something that the president did the day he was inaugurated on January 20th, not yesterday, not today, not 3 weeks ago, but his first day in office is very, very important as we talk about this. When it comes to PPP, which is something that was rolled out in the previous administration, and one of the points that Ron made was about how PPP was initially implemented, and so many of the concerns were around business owners who are small business owners, and in this instance, Black small business owners not being able to have an equitable foot at getting access to these funds. The way the Biden-Harris administration rolled out PPP included, one, ensuring that our CDFIs were the first in line for the second draw of PPP funding. Two, prioritizing underrepresented, underserved, small, rural, women, and veteran-owned businesses in the second round of PPP funding. And also putting into place certain programs and policies around PPP, including removing the requirement that if you had student loan debt, you were no longer eligible to apply for PPP. Why does that matter? We know that when it comes to education, our community is oftentimes taking out student loans. And in a situation where you have a global pandemic on your hands, people may not be in a position to actually pay their student loans, but we did not want that to preclude someone from being able to keep their business afloat. We also doubled down on enforcing and ensuring that people were understanding of the fact that PPP sole proprietors and independent contractors were eligible for PPP funding. And so the way in which the initial framing of PPP was made was as though you needed to be, a significantly large business. But that was not the case. If you were a gig economy worker as an independent contractor filing a 1099, if you were a sole proprietor, you too were eligible. You are the employee of your company. And we also know that many Black and brown businesses do not employ a large number of employees, but we know that they themselves are the first and most important employee to their business. And I know this firsthand, having served as an entrepreneur for 11 years. Really quickly, I'll just make one or two other comments about a few very important ways in which this administration, and particularly our office, the Small Business Administration, under the leadership of Administrator Isabella Guzman, have rolled out other programs. There was the $28.6 billion restaurant revitalization program that was rolled out. And in the first 21 days of that program being available to the U.S. small business community, it was prioritized for women, for underrepresented, underserved communities. Again, and looking at the ways in which we have been rolling out programs to ensure that there are no businesses left behind. And I would just also say that the people who are part of this political appointee group are very much so people who've come from firsthand experiences in this space. And I personally feel inspired by watching us all get to work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cofield. Let's pivot for a second. Again, thanks to the National Urban League for engaging us in this dialogue. Let's talk about the National Urban League's entrepreneurship programs, particularly for women of color, which, as you talked about, Ms. Cofield, are particularly hit. What are the unique challenges facing women entrepreneurs in this environment? Ms. Devon, would you like to go first, followed by Ms. Nixon?
Sure, thank you. So the National Urban League's Entrepreneurship Center program is really focused on giving minority businesses, in particular Black-owned businesses, the resources and the tools that they need to thrive, to grow, to create businesses, to scale those businesses. We are particularly focused on Black-owned businesses, and we do work with many women-owned businesses, and I think my colleague, Sheila Mixon, will speak specifically to some of the work that she's doing in her entrepreneurship center. But we know that that the challenges of COVID have really heavily impacted our business owners. They've been in front-facing businesses where they have been heavily impacted by the fact that there were social distancing guidelines. They've also been heavily impacted, as you've heard, from the challenges of obtaining capital for their businesses to help them survive and also to grow. And so we've really been focusing on helping these women-owned businesses with a couple of things, helping them to pivot, to come up with strategies to keep their businesses afloat, to help them with disaster recovery preparation, to help them with fiscal and administrative needs, to assist them as they look to get capital for their businesses, to work with them on business disruption services so that these kind of challenges can be overcome, if God forbid there's another situation like this one. Also working with our business owners to come up with more flexible operating models so that those women-owned businesses really haven't, the wherewithal to survive. And so we've been really working very hard with those business owners to overcome the challenges that we know the pandemic has exacerbated. And I'll turn to my colleague Sheila to talk very specifically about some of the work that she's doing in her entrepreneurship center to specifically undergird and help our women business owners with coaching and training. Sheila?
Thank you, Stephanie. One of the things that we're doing as part of my my center is we had a Woman of Color initiative that we began this year. It was actually 2 years in the making, and we finally launched that program this year. And we did part of that in partnership with one of our corporate members, Fifth Third Bank. And what we were attempting to do is to help identify Black-owned businesses, Black women-owned businesses that weren't currently certified and weren't taking advantage of the procurement opportunities that both private and public sector organizations have that to avail themselves of that. And so we spent an inordinate amount of time seeking out Black women business owners that weren't certified across Fifth Third's territory. They decided to do a pilot program. We were able to identify 116 women-owned businesses in Fifth Third's territory that covered Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And fortunately for me, I was able to 84 of that 116 came from my territory alone. And we were able to scholarship some of those businesses to become certified, but it's not just about the certification. We also have to spend time to train them on how to build a sustainable company so that they can avail themselves of the opportunities when they present themselves. I'll kind of stop there, but that's one of the things that we've been doing around Black-owned businesses, as well as making sure the ones that are certified, that they know that there's a network out there that can help them. And when I talk to network, I'm talking the other Black women business owners that are certified that can share their best practices on how they're navigating those procurement opportunities that are there.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mixon. I'm gonna switch gears for a second. We've talked about the policies, we talked about the challenges in the pandemic, we've talked about the focus on African-American female entrepreneurs. I'm gonna toss this next question over to Ron and Stephanie. Let's talk about the deep-rooted challenges that African-American entrepreneurs face, such as undercapitalization. We all understand the racial bias that comes from lenders. It is a challenge. It's not for the lack of not wanting to start a business, but getting access to capital and keeping it is an issue. How do these issues manifest themselves when COVID crisis struck? But more importantly, as we begin to climb out of this, what do we do? So let's start with you, Ron, and then go to Stephanie.
Great question. If you ask any small business owner what their number one concern will be, any business owner in America, they will say access to capital. But when you ask a Black business owner, they will say their number one, number two, as well as their number three concern is access to affordable and accessible capital. I think for so often, you've heard the story that 90% of small businesses fail within the first few years. it even gets larger for Black-owned businesses, and it's not due to lack of acumen, not due to lack of passion, not due to commitment of acumen and working. It has a lot to do with the amount of money that they start with. If the average Black family has less than $300 left for an emergency, the average Black business has less than 1 month of revenue set aside for an emergency. And so when issues like the COVID-19 hit, many of us weren't and did not have the extended capital and or credit to get through difficult times. So when the programs come out like a payroll protection plan that really wasn't set up for Black-owned businesses, and or a program called the EIDL loan program was really probably more geared towards Black entrepreneurs. But when you put loan at the end of it, it automatically deters many Black-owned businesses. Yeah. The average Black-owned business, I could be a Black-owned homeowner with a college degree, with a great business plan. I could have a white neighbor that's a high school graduate that is renting his home. We could both go to the same bank with the same business plan, asking for the same amount. Two things are going to happen. My white peer is going to get his 100,000. I'm going to get 40,000. And typically as a community, when we leave, we're, thank God I got this $40,000. Lord, I know you're going to bless me and I'm going to make it work. That's not the reality. The reality is many of us fail because we don't have enough capital to be able to get through the difficult times. And so when you have a program that's geared towards getting capital that's affordable, it is very difficult. Even when we get government contracts and the government says, hey, you can get a contract January 1st and may not get paid till June 15th, it is challenging for Black-owned businesses now to have to go borrow money to make the payroll for the federal government or to cover the overhead for the federal government. We've got to be able to do some things immediately. One of the programs that the Biden Obama administration implemented was the prompt pay program, which allowed you to start a contract January 1st. You could invoice January 15th and be getting paid by the end of the month. Those are programs that this administration that we're looking for from the Biden-Harris administration to be able to implement without there being congressional input and without costing America additional dollars. These are the types of programs that I think Black business owners are welcoming and truly need.
Let's pause right there. Ms. Devon, can you comment on that? And then Ms. Cofield, quickly about what programs you think are in place to answer some of these challenges. Ms. Devon and then Ms. Cofield briefly. Thank you.
Sure. So what I would add to what Ron has said is a couple of things. One, we know about the challenges that Black-owned businesses have faced, and the National Urban League has been very instrumental in working with the administration to ensure that when the PPP was reauthorized, that we were able to open it up with minority depository institutions and CDFIs that we know are mission-driven organizations in our communities that are able to understand the cultural differences and all of the things that Black business owners that Ron has talked about are facing in their communities. They know about the inequities, they know about the historical discrimination, and so they have made the effort to work with us in our communities. And when we couldn't get loans from the SBA lenders, we were able to go to those organizations. And so that's an important not solve, but that's an important way for our Black business owners to get capital. And the National Urban League and US Black Chambers and others have been heavily involved in that. The other thing that the administration is doing now is really working with all of us on community navigators. So we are going out to evangelize in our communities with people at our entrepreneurship centers that know and understand these communities, know and understand the challenges that these business owners are facing in getting capital, and are attuned to that and can then go out, talk to them about the programs, help them prepare their applications, help them find and connect with banks and CDFIs that will help them. And so those are some of the things that the Urban League has been doing to kind of address those issues.
Ms. Cofield, briefly comment or any additions?
Sure. A couple of things. One, as it relates to the EIDL loan program, which Ron is absolutely right, it is a loan program, but there is a $10,000 grant that comes at the beginning of the EIDL loan program, which is a advance of the loan. And so I want to make sure that Black business owners know about that. Also, under this administration, the $150,000 loan minimum was increased to $500,000. And so also, because of additional funding made possible by the American Rescue Plan, those people who applied for an EIDL advance and received less than their initial $10,000 would also receive the delta between what they received and what they should have received as it relates to the $10,000. So I want to make that very, very clear that that is also something that it is a program that people should be very much so aware of. There was also an additional $5 billion that was made available through targeted advances. And these are, again, not loans, they're targeted advances, and they're targeted to low-income communities across the country, businesses that are located in low-income communities. And so, again, this is coming through the EIDL program, and this is coming out of the Biden-Harris administration, and this is coming through the Small Business Administration. The Shuttered Venues program. I could continue to go on and on around the type of money that is coming through to support what we know is the devastation that has happened to small businesses across this country. And also, there was a previous conversation around women businesses. My office just this week released $2.7 million to support women business centers across the country that are providing innovative programs to meet the needs of women entrepreneurs in their footprint and across the nation. So I believe that there remains work to be done as a champion on both sides, right? I know that there continues to be work that needs to be done, but I also want to really reinforce that I don't know that we've ever lived through a time such as now where we have seen the types of programs coming through the Small Business Administration in the ways that it has. And Stephanie mentioned the Community Navigators program. And the truth of the matter is that each and every one of us on this panel today are community navigators. We have been on the front lines of ensuring that our community was aware, informed, and prepared to engage with programs to support business advancement.
Thank you so much. So there's government money, there are programs. I'm going to ask a controversial question. Are we getting our fair share? Ms. Mixon, let's start with you.
Initial response would be no. But what we're finding on the local level is working with those city governments that are providing grant funds back to those organizations that have a focus on working with Black and Brown businesses. I know the city of Cincinnati has funded my entrepreneurship center and given us the ability to provide grants to those Black and Brown businesses that are in within the city limits of Cincinnati. And then one of our foundations here is providing additional funds for those that are beyond the city limits, those Black and Brown businesses. Part of the issue that we have with not having enough capitalization for those business owners, one of the bigger issues, and I know Ron will agree with me, is the credit history of our business owners. And if we can't get them to understand what they need to do to shore up their credit, that's another barrier for them to secure those loans. Now, I'm a recovering banker, so I understand the process of what is needed for them to be credible businesses to receive loans. And then what I love about being at the Urban League is being able to provide some of those wraparound services in our financial services industry that is looking at helping them correct their credit issues and getting them to understand that, yes, the loan is for the business, but banks look at the business owner's credit history to make that decision. and trying to get them to understand that and then get them the help they need so that we can make sure that when they apply for that loan, they're in a better position in which to get it.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Mr. Busby, if you'd like to make a comment on that? I mean, it's the basics, right? And this has been happening way before COVID. So what do we do?
I think a lot of it has to do with relationships. I'm one that says, I don't believe the story that Black business owners don't have financial skill sets. The whole terminology, financial literacy, is almost to me offensive. As a community, we have more educated business owners with postgraduate degrees. We've been in business longer than any other ethnic group in this country. But it has to do with, do we have a relationship with a banker like a Ms. Nixon so that we can go in and have a conversation about, here's my challenges today, here's why I'm having these challenges, here's my plan of action to get out of these challenges, as well as these are my future plans for growth. And when you have dialogue and when you have an open, transparent conversation with a banker, that's where you start to make sure that you're having access to the credit as well as the funding that you're going to need. And I really want to piggyback on what Ms. Devane said. This isn't going to be the last pandemic. It may be, a cyber security scare. It may be, that you have a challenge in your own family that could equate to the same type of pandemic that we're seeing today. And so for me and my members, I'm trying to tell them to make sure that they're meeting their banker where they are. I'm not a big fan of the fintech, although I understand the role that it has. I want my members to have real relationships with their banker so that they can go in and have a conversation about what they're going to need today as well as in the future. And that starts with conversations, dialogue, and then we can start talking about repairing of credit as well as some of the other challenges that we have.
Thank you, Mr. Busby.
Can I add something to what Ron has shared? I think the other piece of that, and as a service provider, one of the things that we're helping that will help enhance that relationship talk is being able to help our Black businesses look at other types of revenue streams that can help help that conversation along as they're trying to maneuver their way through getting additional funding and building those relationships with their bankers, and understanding that if that banker isn't receptive to you, then this one you need to go and look for another bank. And there's nothing wrong with that. And understanding that you're not tied to any bank, you need to do what's in the best interest of your business, and not all banks have your best interests at heart, and understanding that. And that's where we come in as service providers to be able to offer that type of support to those business owners, to give them alternative ways of looking at how they build additional revenue streams and how to approach those bankers and alternative lenders out there that can assist them.
Thank you so much. Ms. Devon, as the nation's economic recovery takes shape, we talked about sustainable impact, and sustainable impact equates to legislation. What have we learned thus far that really should guide our policy moving forward? I'd like you to comment on that briefly, and then you, Ms. Cofield, briefly as well.
Sure. So, the National Urban League is really focused heavily on ensuring that, there's equity and that Black business owners have access. And so we are really working with the administration to, promote certain types of legislation. One of the things that we haven't talked about, but we think is important, is the authorization of the Minority Business Development Agency. And I think we know that that agency is the only one that's really focused on the unique needs of minority businesses. And, everything from upskilling businesses, providing grant opportunities, whether it's at the ecosystem level where we sit or through other programs. We are keenly aware of the role that they play in helping Black business owners to overcome these challenges and to help those of us at the ecosystem level to work more closely with and support our business owners. So we are really heavily invested in looking at the authorization. The other thing that I would say once again, and and Natalie mentioned this, but the community navigator program, we are all community navigators, and it is our role and responsibility to go out and ensure that we are working with the administration to make sure that whatever loan and grant programs are available, that we are out to evangelize, to talk about those programs, to make sure our Black business owners are aware of them, have access to them, can compete for them, and have what they need.
Ms. Cofield, brief response.
So, and thank you, Stephanie, for continuing to mention the Community Navigators Program. So just so everyone is aware, the Community Navigators Program is a $100 million funded program that was also included in the American Rescue Plan, designed to ensure that our office, the Small Business Administration, was connecting with a wide array of organizations that had nodes on the ground to support underrepresented and underserved communities. So I encourage folks to learn more about that program. Legislatively, here's what I'll say. I will say a couple of things. One, we talked about the impact that this pandemic has had on women. And I will talk about this from the perspective of Black women, the financial burden of childcare, the financial burden of being in a situation where you are both a essential worker and you are a mother. There were billions of dollars that were included in the American Rescue Plan to support childcare assistance, to increase the childcare tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000 per household across the United States of America. And when we look at how this policy has the ability to impact Black communities significantly, but it all comes down to, are we aware of these policies? The president is also putting forth a policy agenda around the American Jobs Plan, which also includes billions of dollars to support incubators and co-working spaces and entrepreneurship ecosystems across this nation, to ensure that we're also investing in infrastructure and broadband. We saw all too often during the pandemic that one household had access to technology and Wi-Fi, which we take for granted almost as much as we do breathing air in some instances, and then another household did not have access to that same type of technology. So this requires that the United States of America invests in infrastructure across the country, and this is part of the president's jobs plan, which is another legislative piece, investing in our infrastructure. We just also heard recently that the head of the Department of Transportation has doubled down on their commitment to ensure that minority businesses and minority communities and minority workers have access to the jobs infrastructure, the billions of dollars that are coming through jobs that are coming out of infrastructure development and transportation development across this nation. So to me, in my answering on this side of the equation, right, there's twofold. One, being aware of what has been passed by policy and Congress members, because it is executed and implemented by the executive branch of government, whether that be MBDA, whether that be my office with the Small Business Administration, whether that be the Department of Transportation. The money flows through what Congress passes and then goes into execution and implementation phase through the administrative offices. That's one. The second thing is to be aware of the process of engaging these agencies. And I think our conversations, again, I'm happy to be a part of the National Urban League's conversation, happy to have been a former Black Chamber CEO under the leadership of Ron Busby. So this is critical that we have champions. It's critical that we're reading legislation. It's critical that we are a part of legislation. And it's critical that we understand how legislation is implemented and the government agencies that do that work and how they have to get that work done.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cofield. So the next couple of questions, we're going to do a round robin for everybody. I need you to limit your response to under a minute so we can get all of this moving. I'm sitting out here in the audience. I've been inspired. There are programs, there's help, but I'm scared. I don't know what to do. What's the advice for that entrepreneur out there that's looking at a mountain of debt, not knowing what to do? First thing they're going to do, Mr. Busby, over to you first. Less than a minute. First thing you tell them to do.
The first thing that I would tell them to do is to go to byblack.us, buyblack.us. Onboard yourself as a Black-owned business so that we can find you. We provide resources, entrepreneurial training, access to capital, and contracting. The U.S. Black Chamber was founded on our 5 pillars. Advocacy. We are here in Washington, D.C., ensuring that the needs and your voices are being heard. Access to capital, contracting from the federal government, from the corporate America, which we haven't really had a big deal conversation, as well as where are Black people spending our money and how can we keep those dollars in our community. Entrepreneurial training, that's what we do. 12 entrepreneurial training classes every month to make sure that you have the acumen, the relationships, as well as the opportunities. And then lastly, it really is about making sure that our 149 chambers across the country all know who you are. So if you're in a city across the country, you can find someone there that will remove the scare, that will remove the fear of you moving forward, because understand, all of us that are here on this panel today are in our jobs to make sure that you're successful. We all know that the number one concern that we have is unemployment for Black people, but we have 2 million Black-owned businesses. If each one of them hires one unemployed African-American, we don't have an unemployed conversation in our communities across the country. So you can find out information at usblackchambers.org. Make sure you're not afraid. This is really an opportunity for us to expand our businesses. There is a new horizon on the future, and we're looking forward to you being involved in it. Thank you so much.
Busby. Ms. Devon, you?
Sure. So I would echo what Ron said. The National Urban League, through its Entrepreneurship Center program, is heavily invested and committed to ensuring that Black business owners have access to all the tools they need. We provide mentoring, we provide counseling, we provide training. You've heard some of the great work that Sheila Mixon has talked about on this call. Please go to our website, nul.org, and connect with us. We can connect you with any one of our centers, and certainly while we're virtual, we have a network across the country that we can connect you with to talk you through whatever your concerns are, your challenges are. We will meet you where you live. We will assist you. We will help you set your goals for your business. We will help you to grow and to scale. More importantly, we will help you to thrive and survive this pandemic. And so heavily suggest and recommend that you contact the National Urban League as well, and we can help you with your needs. Thank you very much.
Ms. Mixon.
I would say most part of my center, I have a small business development center that's there. I would tell the audience to seek out in your community. Is there a small business development center there? Is there a women's business center in your area? Check out the Black chambers that are in your cities. We're all connected. We know each other's programs so well, and we know where to refer you to so that you're getting the best bang for your buck. And just about everything we do is at no cost, and no cost does not mean less than. It just means that you have the ability to come to us, seek the help you need. All you got to do is ask for it. That's what we're there for, is to assist you.
I would also just echo and say, visit any of the partners that you've heard today on the call, any of their centers, any of their chapters, any of their chambers, and also visit the Small Business Administration, so SBA.gov. We're proud to fund centers across this nation, SBDC centers, some of which are affiliated with the partners that you've heard from today, and women's business centers, some of whom, again, are affiliated with partners that you're hearing from throughout the conference today. And then I would just also encourage folks to ensure that they have their paperwork and documentations ready at any given point in time, because we don't know what life will throw at us, whether it's a pandemic or an unfortunate personal life circumstance. And the last thing I will say is that technology infusion and integrating technology into your business will be very critical to the future of how we do business together, how your customers reach you, and how your workers connect with you.
I think this has been an important discussion. For those of you out there, you're not in this alone. I would add that, I wish we had more time to talk about the importance of public-private partnership. This is not necessarily on organizations like the National Urban League or the Small Business Administration and the government. You need the private sector to step up. You absolutely do. And they need to be partners with us in this movement and desire to make sustainable impact. I thank each and every one of you for your commitment to change and to making impact for Black and Brown businesses across the US. And I hope that this is the beginning of what will be an ongoing dialogue. Thank you for your time and your consideration. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Naja, and our amazing panelists. It was a great discussion and frankly, a wonderful way to conclude our conference. And now a short message from our sponsor, Philip Morris. Thank you, Philip Morris. On behalf of the National Urban League, as we conclude this wonderful conference, the 18th Annual Legislative Policy Conference, I want to acknowledge all of our wonderful guest speakers and moderators who participated in this year's conference, as well as the internal and external production teams that made it possible. We deeply appreciate your time and commitment to advancing the goals of our theme, Beyond Recovery, the movement for an equitable normal. We especially want to thank our corporate sponsors, starting with our presenting sponsor, Johnson & Johnson, our leader sponsor, UPS, and our community of advocate sponsors, Eli Lilly and Company, Verizon, Wells Fargo, T-Mobile, Walmart, American Property Casualty Insurance Association, Comcast, Dove, Philip Morris, and AARP. I'd also like to acknowledge the internal staff production team and our external production team of Noelle Elaine and Backhand Productions, who put so much work in this year's conference. Thanks, guys. It was great working with you. And now a final reminder of today's call to action. If you have not yet done so, text Justice Now, one word, to 52886 to tell your senator to support the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That's it for our 2021 conference. Let's do it next year, but next time in person. Before we go, please take a look at a final message from our presenting sponsor, Johnson & Johnson.
Pain doesn't care how old you are. Or what color you are. Pain doesn't care if you live in a small town or in the spotlight. Pain doesn't care who you are or what you do. Pain has no limits. Neither should care. That means we need care without limits. Care at a higher level. Care like a parent with a newborn. Care like we took an oath. Care like risking your life to save someone else's. That means care that's strong, fast, and safe. That's care without limits.